At the social media conference, you were talking about, getting online activism into constructive political engagement. A lot of people will just say, these people are just ranting, yeah? We're going to move on to the next thing. This thing is going to come. We're going to talk about social media attacks. Then tomorrow something else will happen and we'll move on and we'll still have the social media attacks. You haven't taken it away. Like, how does it get offline?
So I think it starts with two things.
Yeah.
One is, how do we define change? What does change really mean? Because if I wake up in the morning and I want to rant about MTN stealing my megabytes, and all I want to do is rant and get it off my chest, then for me, I've achieved my objective. If on the other hand, like Dr. Kabumba recently, I want to wake up and say enough is enough, MTN, you have got to change your practices, then I have to follow through that. What does that do? It gives us it leads the discussion to two questions. One, what is the message that we are sending out? Two, what is the audience that we are targeting? Because there are people that we need to engage that are not social media. Social media in that context is an amplifier. You can come out and say, look, there's an issue here. I am here, you will hear me. You might not like what I have to say, you might not like how I say it, but you will hear me. But after we've heard you, then what? That's where the conversation for me needs to go to the strategic engagement to say, when I get audience, I will say that this is what needs to happen. And that process involves three things. One, the clarity of message. So just earlier we were talking about comparing the activism today with the activism before social media. If you go back and look at Gandhi, you go back and look at King Jr., you go back and look at the sermons of Billy Graham on family and race and some of the hot button issues that still exist today, abortion, divorce. If you go back and look at Malcolm X, if you go back and look at all these people who did passive resistance at the highest level, you would still resonate with their message today. The question that I'm asking young people is, if you look at your tweets, would you retweet yourself 10 years from now? Is there a consistency of message? Is there a clarity? Because we knew that when James Baldwin defined the Negro, you understood. He was clear in how he communicated to the black man in the fields, to the guy in Congress, and to the man in the Oval Office. But you will then find those who say it is us versus them. And I think that's a bit unfortunate. Every time I see a conversation resulting in us versus them, I get a bit frustrated because then it kills the message. If the message is strong and the message is, because the issues affect people. So if I want to resonate with people, I'm going to say, this is how the social media tax affects you. And people say, oh no, but I can live without social media. And that's not the point. The point is that you probably will not be employed because your employer can choose to leave the country because they don't trust the investment climate because of the new tax. So we have to be able to bring the message to people's living rooms such that you don't have, that's for politicians, that's for lawyers, that's for academics, those journalists also. Those barriers need to fall. And the easiest way is, let's be clear about the message. Number two, let's have the stamina and the staying power. The only thing that starts at the top is the grave. When we were growing up, I went to boarding school in primary, and we used to say to our scores very diplomatically. So if a quarrel began at 10 a.m., we would exchange chits in class and say, see you at 4 behind the pit latrine. And then we would draw a line and say, you cross the line if you're a man. You cross the, and you thump your chest and you cross the line. He has fear. And the line would keep moving sometimes and so on. And we cannot treat social issues like that. We have to be able to have the staying power. And I think one thing that will help is pick a message and run with one message. So that we know that when I meet with Patra, her objective is to get the middle class to think about the impact that the tax is having on men, that women's issues are having on society, because they matter to me. Either because I'm a father of a girl, or because I employ or work with ladies. And so how do I resonate with that? But also to break down the demographics and say, When you deal with millennials, you can't treat them as though you're dealing with those who lived in the 70s. Why? Because society has changed. And it's not their fault. So we need to get more scientific and to become more clear and to be more tolerant, to be honest.
Maybe then my question would be, how much do people care? I mean, all these issues are happening, we are talking about them, but how much do people care about these issues to even want to listen to the conversation, and then we can effect the change?
I think that for you as a vessel of change, your assignment isn't to focus on how much do they care. Your assignment is to say, how do I get them to care? And so if I start by saying the problem with Uganda is not that government created a new tax, the problem is that you don't care. You are the problem. You are the voter. Then someone says, but well, why do you say I don't care? And then you tell them, well, speak up if you do. So you start the conversation from the point that people don't care. And you say, how do I get them to care? And you see, everyone who has caused change, even in the business world, they asked Ford, of the Ford Motor Company, how did you do it? And he said, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So he built a car when they were holding conventions in New York on how to deal with cow dung. There was a time when the problem was, there are too many horses, how do we deal with horse manure and horse dung? There was a conference on that. And then he made the car and the horses left the city. They asked the late founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, how did you do it? And he said, my job was to give the customers what they needed but did not know that they needed. And we must never shy away from dealing with the fact that, yes, people don't care, we will get them to care. Which is why it's important to have a clarity of message, that when people hear it, they remember. We've become a scandal society. We go from one headline to another and we move on. And so that's an issue.
Yeah.
Why don't people care about the issues? So fix that issue. And then the issue can be anything. So the question is, if we want to change society, it seems to me that the issue you're dealing with is, how do I get people to care?
Yeah.
Why can't we get Ugandans to say, this is my country, fall in love with my country, tell people they have power? People don't know. It's amazing. We assume that they complain. People feel helpless. So, but our parents used to tell us, at least we sleep at night. On the evening of that generation, we have a dawn of a generation that is desperate. There are no jobs. The economy is struggling. There's a new tax every day. Infrastructure is failing. And government doesn't seem to have the answer. Why is the shilling collapsing? And so the real issue there, below the need for money and relationships, is the despair. Tap into that and tell people, instead of being desperate, do something about it. And that is why we need the stamina and the staying power to know that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Change will come. But that begs the question, what is the change?
The urgency, yeah, may not be able to wait, through all these boardroom meetings and trying to negotiate with people to see us as human beings and understand that we need these issues out of the way. Yeah.
But so here's the way I'm looking at it, Patra. Women are being killed, and I condemn that in the strongest terms. It is sad that it has taken this long to get even one answer from the state. And I am not happy with the answers we've received to this point. I can go on record and say that. I think the answers have been dodgy, they've been dismissive, and they've been shallow. 100%. And the state has to do that. But the bigger question is, why are women being killed? It is okay for us to say, stop the killing of women, address the issues conclusively, arrest those who killed, prosecute them. Does that really answer the question of why were those women killed? Because if you don't resolve the why, the situation will reoccur. It might have another face. I don't think it should go from women to children. But women were killed and the numbers grew because we kept quiet about Buganda, the Buganda killings back in 2007. A woman was in her house, minding her business. She locked the door. Her child went to get bread from the shop and milk so they could have a meal. As the child walked into the door and shut it behind them, a bullet went through that door, shot the woman, shot her daughter, and she was pregnant. No one paid for that woman. For me, that was woman zero. We allowed security forces to believe that we can have these lapses and these injustices, and it's okay. So for me, the conversation must be that it's enough. We can't have any more women's deaths. But the conversation must also, in another space, start about the role of security forces in resolving crime and holding agencies accountable. If there is a DPC responsible for Nakularia, why was the DPC not charged? I don't care if the other people have been arrested. Someone slept on the job. The day we went from woman number 1 to woman number 2, that DPC has to answer. And that's what you said to the IGP in the boardroom. That's what I mean by what's the message? What is change? It may not be their fight to take on the forces, but can the women identify whose role it is, even within social media, off social media, to start that conversation? Because then you build groundswell movements. I gave the example earlier of Billy Graham and Martin Luther King Jr., 2 preachers. And they sit together and say, race is a problem. And Billy Graham says, I want you to know that I understand you. How can we work together? And King Jr. says, you know what? Thank you for understanding us. But you're white. I am black. You belong to the Crusades, to the White House, to Congress, and to boardrooms. I belong on the street. You do your part. I will do mine. Let's work together. That, for me, is how you build a movement. Because think about it, 32 years ago, what convinced young people to go to the bushes of Lowell? There were no guns. It was despair. We are back to the same root causes that led us there. The despair that said, this cannot go on anymore. And I think we are there. Society may have changed, but we must go beyond the means that we use to communicate to the methods we use to push for and to derive that change.